Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Jem and welcome to Hey Psyche if you're watching this in the YouTube channel that we have, and Unraveled Psyche if you're listening to this over different types of podcast platforms. So it has been quite some time now since I posted different episodes and even content in Unraveled Psyche, the platform where we provide a safe space, a support system for those who want to get mental health support. And it has been quite a while because I've also been trying to take a break from all of it. It has been extremely overwhelming in a great way. And sometimes it's very taxing when you're trying to help other people to the point that you forget that you also have something to take care of, which is your mental health. And that's why it sparked an initiative on my end to rest, to just kind of like pull back slowly and then engage again once I'm ready, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So I am back for now, and I'm extremely happy that you're still here. So as we're trying to refresh the content in all of the platforms of Unraveled Psyche, I just want to let you know that we're transitioning into an unfiltered mental health talks. So you might hear me stumble, stutter, you might hear me talk about my opinion or other stuff that is kind of like a flaw or a mistake that's being perceived by other people. But I decided to create that kind of conversation, to create that kind of form as we're trying to talk right now in this podcast, because I've been struggling with perfectionism. Like, if you know, my podcast scripts are extremely detailed to the point where I won't push out if I think that the recording that I did is not good enough. And I think that's something that I have to overcome as well. And me creating also an unfiltered mental health talk is me trying to be accountable with what I'm trying to pursue, which is not cringing over the fact that I might stutter at some point. Because mind you, you might listen to the videos that I push out or the episodes that I push out, and you don't hear some stuttering, and other imperfections. But there are imperfections and flaws that are happening behind the scenes. So this is also me trying to be accountable with myself. And also, I also want to encourage you that you might be pulling yourself back and trying to get out of your comfort zone because you think you're not ready yet, or it's not perfect enough, or the standards that you have set for yourself is not yet enough so that you would pursue the venture that you have. And I think talking in an unfiltered way, like what I'm doing right now, which is stuttering, I think talking in an unfiltered way is extremely helpful and encouraging to other people as well, because they see that it's not a smooth path. You're not always going to be good at something that you're doing. Heck, I'm even rambling right now because I haven't scripted this. But yeah, that's the point of what I'm trying to do, is to create an unfiltered mental health podcast for you all. Of course, there will be some where it's not, because, for example, in meditations that I will be excitingly sharing with you eventually. But right now, we're focusing on this moment. We're back now. We're functioning extremely well. How are you? Let's talk about you right now. How are you doing? I hope you're doing extremely well despite the current events that have been happening, and I hope you're doing great or coping greatly in your life. And if you're not, that's perfectly fine. Your feelings are extremely valid, and this is a safe space where we talk about that. This is a place where we talk about our mental health. We talk about empowering other people, building ourselves up so that we could also build others up, and also becoming accountable with the flaws, the toxicity that we have, and trying to change our behavior for the better. So welcome to Unraveled Psyche, and this is our first podcast in October. And I'm just so happy that I'm starting again because it has been so long. Today we're going to talk about empathy. You might have not heard about that word yet, or maybe you have, but in a context where it's all wrong and it made you confused of what it really is. You see, when we're talking about empathy, we're not talking about sympathy. It's not equal to sympathy. Of course, they rhyme, but their meanings are totally different. Sympathy is feeling pitiful towards someone who's experiencing a tragic moment. And empathy is understanding people by putting yourself in their shoes. It's a common term, a common phrase that we usually encounter when we're talking about empathy. But that's extremely important for us to understand. Empathy is understanding people by putting yourself in their shoes, in their situation. You're not motivated by pity or sorrow to understand their behavior, but rather you understand because you're taking in their story and their perspective by looking deeply at their issue. You're looking at their past. You're looking at that at some point, or even now, they may be toxic, or you may be looking at why is this person responding to specific things around him or her or they in a specific way. So you're taking in their story and their perspective by looking deeply at their issue. And it's extremely awesome when you're able to see the full version of who a person is. You know, the good, the bad, and without judgment. You see the good parts, their bad parts, without anything in mind that's criticizing them, but rather your intent is to extremely understand them. And the best part when you empathize is that you help people. You lighten up the stress that they're feeling, because let's face it, it's stressful when you feel misunderstood, and empathy clarifies them, and that helps you see them fully, and that makes them feel better about themselves. However, the bad part about being someone who's empathic is that it mentally drains you. It exhausts you, it's tiring, and it takes a lot of work. So it's taxing for the empathic person, the person who is extremely empathetic. And with that notion, you might ask yourself, why can't people give back the care or empathy and compassion that I give to them? So I'm gonna share some points that I think will be helpful for you to understand that. And the first is that the ability to give empathy is not the same for everyone. You know, not giving a crap about someone is easy. I did that when I was in my early teenage stage, of course. Let's put aside the hormones for a second. But yeah, when I was a teenager, I thought putting up walls and being someone who's not expressive is being strong. I feel strong. I thought that was equal to strength, you know, not breaking your walls or not being vulnerable is equal to strength. But as I grew up, I realized that not giving a crap about someone is easy to do. It's easy to ignore people. However, trying to be vulnerable with people is kind of hard. And empathy requires a greater immersion into other people's struggles. It's deep, intentional work. Usually, because it brings some mental weight, some close themselves off and they become unexpressive and apathetic. And that's a term that is the opposite of empathy. You know, it's very important for you to understand that not everyone can give back the amount and level of empathy that you are trying to give to them. People who empathize a lot usually get hurt or drained more. Why? Because it's you who does the work. it's you who does the heavy lifting. And I'm not trying to discourage you to be empathic. Heck, I am empathic and it drains me, to be honest. But it's important to be aware that you will get hurt when you expect people to give back the empathy that you give to them. You will extremely get hurt when you provide empathy to other people and then you see them not giving you the amount of empathy and compassion that you give to them. Sometimes it's even heartbreaking when you're receiving criticism to someone whom you have given so much empathy to, so much compassion to, and yet in just one flaw or one mistake, they criticize you for what you did. So that drains you. The reason why can't people give back the care and compassion you give to them is because the ability to give empathy is not the same for everyone, not the same in each level. The second point, people who may be reluctant to express empathy may be dealing with something that stops them from providing and sharing warm and positive emotions. I was reading a study called Caring is Costly, and the researchers wanted to study about when and why people show empathy to others. And they successfully held their experiment. Their experiment showed that when the participants were asked to choose between empathy and objectivity when it comes to describing a person, they avoid empathy. The first trial that they did, 29% of the participants chose empathy. On the second trial that they did, 30% of the participants chose empathy. The majority of them in each of the trials chose objectivity when it comes to describing a person. But it was interesting for the researchers because when it came to a point where the participants had to describe a person whom they know or whom they are close to, they choose empathy instead of being objective. You know, Sheffer, Cameron, and Inslet, I probably butchered that name. I'm sorry. It's so hard to pronounce it. I think it's Inslet. These researchers, the one who created that study, the researchers of that study, mentioned that empathy requires deep work because you're not just taking someone's story at a surface level or a superficial level. It's not just that. Empathy requires deep work. This in turn becomes taxing to your mental health because the problem that person's facing, if you're putting yourself in their own shoes, almost feels like your own now. And this transference affects your mental health. This is why the researchers of that study concluded that some people refrain to feel empathic towards others because they cannot take that risk for their own sake, for their health's sake. So if you're the empathic person, this is also the reason why you ask yourself why they don't care, like why they don't give back the same energy and care and love and amount of empathy that I give to them. This is why when you're at your low point, when you're emotionally exhausted from empathizing towards other people, you begin to ask the question, why can't my friends or family or loved ones give back the empathy that I give to them? Because we think everyone is empathic as us, and it disappoints us when the truth is as far from what we expect. It's far from reality. One thing that I also learned as I was researching about this topic is that experiences affect one's ability to empathize. Dr. Lila McGavie, a psychiatrist, mentioned in her study that people who experience trauma tend to be extremely hypervigilant, which makes empathizing hard for them to express. You know, hypervigilance is an increase in alertness. It's staying alert, understanding that some things around you, some things around your environment may be harmful on your end. It may be a threat. So you have to be hypervigilant. You have to be extremely alert. And empathy is a method of breaking down walls to allow emotion. So these two are in contrast with each other, because hypervigilance is you building walls so that you won't get attacked if ever there's a threat in your environment, while empathy is breaking down walls. It's becoming vulnerable. So it's important to note that people who are hypervigilant, specifically this characteristic is found in individuals who have survived from trauma. Those who have dealt with that and have not yet recovered yet see empathy as a threat to them that might break them when they need to be strong at all times. If you're listening to this podcast, it may mean that you were attracted to the title. It may mean that you've been asking that question to yourself. Why can't the person I love empathize? Why can't the person I love care more or care as much as I care? And what you're feeling is extremely valid. It's not unfair. It's not wrong to ask yourself that. When you're an empathic person, giving off a lot of empathy and compassion to others, at some point, that question will stop you on your tracks. And it will help you reflect. But I want you to remember this. You are entitled to provide or withhold empathy depending on the situation that you're in. You are entitled to do that. And proper boundaries should be placed so it wouldn't drain you. But it's also important that when you're asking yourself why can't the person I love empathize, it's important to think on the following things that I mentioned beforehand, which is, as we try to recall, that number one, the ability to give empathy is not the same for everyone. And second, that the people who may be reluctant to express empathy may be also dealing with something that stops them from providing and sharing warm and positive emotions. When you're trying to ask this question, it also means that loving them means walking with them slowly and in their own pace as they recover one day at a time until they feel fully capable of breaking down the walls and giving you back the love that you deserve. So if you're an empathic person, I would extremely encourage you to learn to tackle boundaries of when you empathize and when you should stop empathizing. So in the next podcast episode, we're going to tackle just that. We're going to tackle deeply the empathic people. We're going to talk about boundaries. It's not unkind to say no. So we're going to tackle how we set boundaries when we're empathizing, so your mental health could stay divine. So that's it for today's episode. And I hope as you're trying to ask these questions along the way, you get to reflect and at the same time try to understand more your situation and also try to understand the situation of the people who we are trying to talk to. I hope this podcast episode has been helpful on your end, and stay tuned for the next podcast episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.